The first time I held Sadie Vaughn's hand in front of other people, it was because her ex-fiancé had just walked through the door of her cousin's engagement party, and she grabbed my fingers like I was the last handhold on a cliff. "Smile," she whispered through her teeth. "Smile like you love me." "I don't know how to do that on command." "You're an actor." "Act." "I sell kitchen cabinets, Sadie." "I'm not an actor." "Then pretend you're selling me a kitchen cabinet." Convincingly. That was how it started, or at least that was the moment I couldn't pretend it hadn't started. My name is Dawson Riley. I was 28 years old. I ran the design side of a custom cabinetry shop outside Asheville. And up until that October evening, my entire relationship with Sadie Vaughn had been built out of borrowed sugar, shared laundry room hours, and one incident involving her cat, a screen door, and a level of panic on my part that I still consider excessive but justified. We were neighbors. Second floor of a converted mill building that the landlord called industrial charm and the rest of us called the elevator is a personality test. Sadie lived in 2B. I lived in 2D. Between us was 2C, occupied by a man named Gary who kept exotic beetles and, as far as I could tell, no other hobbies. Sadie was 26, a physical therapist at a sports clinic downtown, the kind of person who remembered your name after meeting you once and then used it constantly, like punctuation. She had a laugh that started low and then cracked open into something too loud for polite company, and she used it often, usually at my expense. She wore her dark hair in a knot that never quite held, had a habit of narrating her own bad decisions out loud before making them anyway, and possessed the unique gift of making an argument about parking spaces feel like the most interesting conversation I'd have all week. We were not dating. We were, by any reasonable definition, friends who occasionally ate the other person's leftovers without asking. So when she showed up at my door 40 minutes before her cousin Priya's engagement party, wearing a green dress and an expression like she'd swallowed a bee, and said, "I need a boyfriend for approximately 3 hours," I assumed she was joking. "I have a shift," I said, which wasn't true. I had a Tuesday. "You do not have a shift, Dawson. It's a Saturday, and I watched you eat cereal for dinner through my kitchen window," which, by the way, we need to discuss the blind situation. That's an invasion of privacy. That's a load-bearing observation. "Please put on a real shirt. I need a date." "Why do you need a date?" She looked at me the way people look at you right before they tell you something that's going to cost you your evening. "Because my ex-fiancé is going to be there, and if I walk in alone, my mother is going to spend the entire night asking me if I've talked to Bram, and I would rather set myself on fire." Bram. I'd heard the name exactly twice in the 8 months I'd known her, both times delivered with the same flat, careful tone people use for scar tissue. I knew he'd been the one to end things, 2 weeks before their wedding, no less, over a phone call from a work trip to Denver that he never fully explained. I knew Sadie had moved into the mill building 3 months after that, mostly furnished with things she described as aggressively fine, and I knew that whatever had happened between them still lived somewhere under her ribs, quiet but not gone. "So you want me to be your boyfriend," I said slowly, "for 3 hours, in front of your entire extended family? To convince your ex you've moved on. I want you to be my boyfriend for 3 hours in front of my entire extended family, to convince my mother I've moved on. My ex doesn't need convincing. He dumped me. He knows exactly how moved on I have, or haven't gotten. This is about Linda. Your mom's name is a legal argument now. Dawson. Sadie. Please. I will owe you my whole soul. I will do your laundry for a month. I will stop borrowing your sugar and start borrowing entire meals, transparently, with receipts." I should have said no. I want that on the record, somewhere, because everything that happened afterward makes a lot more sense if you understand that I knew, standing in my doorway in sweatpants with a spoon still in my hand, that saying yes was going to cost me something. I just didn't know yet that the something was going to be my heart. "Fine," I said, "but you owe me a real dinner. Not the sugar kind." Her whole face changed, relief flooding in so fast, it looked like something physical. "Deal. Put on the blue shirt. You look trustworthy in the blue shirt." Is trustworthy the vibe we're going for? Trustworthy and devoted. Can you do devoted? I devoted an entire hour to organizing your recycling after you left it in the hallway for a week. So yes, I think I have range. That was the first time I saw the smile that would go on to systematically dismantle every reasonable defense I had. Small at first, then wide, then that laugh, cracking open in my doorway like something breaking free. I put on the blue shirt. The Vaughn family threw parties the way other families threw funerals, with enormous emotional stakes disguised as small talk. Priya's engagement party was held at a lakeside venue with string lights looped between the porch beams and a caterer who kept circulating with trays of things wrapped in prosciutto. I learned within the first 10 minutes that Sadie had 4 aunts, all of whom asked variations of the same 3 questions, and a grandmother named Opal who looked at me like she was pricing me for parts. "This is Dawson," Sadie said, for the 11th time, her hand laced through mine like it had always lived there. "We've been together a few months now." "A few months," Aunt Carla repeated, delighted. "And you kept him hidden?" Sadie Marie. "I like to vet things before I show them off," Sadie said smoothly. Dawson passed the vetting. "What do you do, Dawson?" This from Aunt Carla's husband, a man in a bow tie who introduced himself as an insurance and then said nothing else about it for the rest of the conversation. "I design custom cabinetry. Kitchens, mostly. Some built-ins." "He redid my kitchen island," Sadie said, which was true, in the sense that I had, 6 weeks earlier, helped her replace a wobbly shelf, and she was now describing it like I'd personally overseen a home renovation show. "It's gorgeous. Show them the picture." I did not have a picture. I improvised a description of a kitchen island so detailed and confident that later, in the car, Sadie would tell me I'd missed my calling as a con artist. We were 3 glasses of Prosecco deep into the evening, and I was starting to enjoy myself in a way I hadn't expected, the two of us developing an entire shorthand language of glances and inside jokes that felt real even though the premise wasn't. When the door to the venue's porch opened and the temperature of the whole party seemed to drop 4 degrees. He was tall, the kind of tall that photographs well, wearing a gray blazer that looked expensive in the specific way of things that are trying to look expensive. He had a jaw you could set a level against, and the kind of easy, practiced smile that made you distrust him before he'd said a single word. Sadie's hand found mine so fast I felt it before I understood why. "That's him," she said, barely moving her lips. "That's Bram." "Smile," I said, echoing her own instruction back at her. "Smile like you're happy I showed up." "I am happy you showed up." "Then it should be easy." She looked at me, something shifting behind her eyes, something that had nothing to do with Bram Whitaker standing across a lakeside porch in a blazer that cost more than my truck. "It is," she said quietly. "That's the weird part." I didn't have time to ask what she meant, because Bram was already crossing the porch toward us, and Sadie's grip on my hand tightened to something just short of painful. "Sadie," he said, like her name was a door he was still allowed to open. "Bram." Her voice had gone very smooth, very controlled, the voice I imagined she used when a client's knee didn't want to bend the right direction. "This is Dawson, my boyfriend." I watched something flicker across his face, there and gone, fast enough that I might have imagined it. "Boyfriend," he repeated. "Didn't know you were seeing someone." "There's a lot you don't know these days," Sadie said. And even though I knew it was a performance, even though I understood I was a prop in a scene she'd been rehearsing since the invitation arrived in her mailbox, I felt something protective flare up in my chest, sharp and immediate. "Dawson," I said, extending a hand. "Good to meet you." Bram shook it. His grip was the kind that tries to prove something. Mine, I'm told, is the kind that doesn't need to. "You too. How long has this been going on?" 8 months, Sadie said, at the exact moment I said, "For months," and there was a beat of silence where I watched her recalibrate faster than seemed humanly possible. "We disagree on the start date," she said smoothly. "I count from when he first made me dinner. He counts from our first official date. It's an ongoing debate." "Very cute," Bram said, in a tone that suggested he did not find it cute at all. "Well, you look happy, Sadie." "I am happy." He held her gaze a beat too long, long enough that I felt the urge to step slightly, casually, unmistakably closer to her, which I did, and which made his jaw tighten in a way I found deeply, unreasonably satisfying. I should circulate, he said finally. Good to meet you, Dawson. Likewise. He walked away, and Sadie exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the porch door opened. Her hand was still in mine. Neither of us moved to let go. You okay? I asked. I will be. Thank you. That was. She shook her head. You were good at that. I had a good teacher. You've been narrating my personality to your entire family for 2 hours. I was building a character. You were supposed to be devoted, remember? I feel very devoted right now. Actually, I said, and I meant it as a joke. Mostly, the kind of thing you say to keep the moment light. But Sadie looked at me for a second longer than the joke required, and something passed between us that had nothing to do with Bram Whitaker or Aunt Carla or the entire elaborate fiction we'd built in my kitchen 40 minutes before the party. We should get more Prosecco, she said finally, looking away first. We should, I agreed, and did not let go of her hand as we walked back inside. The arrangement was supposed to end that night. That was the deal, or at least that was what I told myself in the parking lot afterward, standing next to Sadie's car while she fished for her keys and complained about her Aunt Carla's insurance husband asking her 3 separate times if cabinetry was a stable industry. It was one party, I said. Mission accomplished. Linda thinks you're thriving. Bram thinks you've moved on. My work here is done. Sadie paused, keys halfway out of her bag, and looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Actually, she said slowly, I have a favor to ask, and I want you to feel free to say no. That's never a good opener. Priya's wedding is in 6 weeks. Sadie, I know how it sounds. But if I show up to the engagement party with a boyfriend and then show up to the wedding alone, it's going to look like we broke up, and my mother will spend the entire reception asking me what I did wrong. And honestly, at that point, I'd rather just tell everyone I joined a monastery. You want me to keep being your boyfriend? For 6 more weeks. Fake boyfriend. Very clearly fake. Just consistently fake. With rules. Rules, I repeated. Rules, she confirmed, and pulled a small notebook out of her bag, because of course she had come prepared with an actual notebook, because Sadie Vaughn did not enter negotiations unarmed. 1. We tell people the truth we already told them tonight. 8 months, my count, for months. Yours, ongoing debate. Very cute, never mind. 2. Physical stuff stays in the realm of hand-holding and the occasional arm around the shoulder. Nothing that would embarrass either of us later. Define later. After this is over, and we go back to being neighbors who split the cost of a communal Costco membership. Right. Continue. 3. If either of us starts developing actual feelings, we say something immediately. No pretending, no letting it get weird. I looked at her for a long moment, the parking lot lights buzzing faintly overhead, moths circling in slow, drunk orbits. That seems like a reasonable rule. I'm a very reasonable person. You once cried because a barista spelled your name with a Y. That was a dark week for everyone. Rule 4. We split the emotional labor. I don't want you doing all the performing. If my mother corners you, you're allowed to hand her back to me. Sadie, what? You had this whole thing planned before you even asked me tonight, didn't you? She had the decency to look slightly caught. I may have started drafting rules in the car on the way over. As a contingency. In case you said yes. You didn't think I'd say no. I hoped you wouldn't. There's a difference. I should have found that presumptuous. Instead I found it, inconveniently, charming, in the specific way that only Sadie Vaughn's particular brand of chaos ever managed to be charming to me. Okay, I said. 6 weeks. Fake boyfriend. With rules. With rules, she agreed, and stuck out her hand like we were closing a business deal. Which, in a sense, we were. I shook it. Her hand was warm, and she held on a half-second longer than the handshake strictly required, and neither of us mentioned it. And I drove home that night replaying the whole evening in a loop I didn't examine too closely. The next 6 weeks unfolded the way most disasters do, slowly, and then all at once. We started small. Sadie began leaving her door unlocked on weeknights so I could wander in after work and practice being a couple, which mostly meant her cooking something involving too much garlic while I sat at her counter doing a crossword and offering opinions she didn't ask for. We went grocery shopping together once, for the specific purpose of being seen by her coworker Denise, who Sadie swore would report back to her mother's entire social circle within 48 hours. We held hands at a farmer's market. I learned that Sadie hated cilantro with a moral intensity usually reserved for war crimes, that she'd broken her wrist at 19 falling off a bounce house at a friend's birthday party, that she cried at dog food commercials, but not at actual sad movies, and that she had a laugh reserved specifically for when I said something she thought was accidentally funny, which was different from her regular laugh in a way I couldn't have explained to anyone, but knew instantly every time I heard it. I learned these things not because I was building a character. I learned them because I was paying attention, closely, hungrily, in a way that should have told me something the first week, and instead took me almost a month to admit. There was a Sunday, 2.5 weeks in, when Sadie showed up at my door holding 2 mismatched mugs and announced that couples who'd been together 8 months, by her count, ought to have a shared morning ritual, and that she decided ours was going to be terrible coffee and worse crossword puzzles. We sat on my fire escape, which technically wasn't rated for 2 people according to the lease, and argued for 20 minutes about a 7-letter word for stubborn, and she got so worked up defending her answer, which turned out to be wrong, that she nearly knocked her mug clean off the railing, and I caught it without thinking. And she looked at my hand around the mug, and then at my face like she was recalculating something. "Good reflexes," she said. "Years of catching things you almost destroy." I don't destroy things. I test their structural integrity. You tested my recycling bin's structural integrity for an entire week. That bin had it coming. There was another afternoon, in the shop, when Sadie showed up unannounced with 2 coffees and a question about whether I could build her a small shelf for her bathroom, and ended up staying 3 hours, perched on an overturned crate, asking Marcus increasingly specific questions about wood grain while I worked, until Marcus pulled me aside near the table saw and said, low enough that she couldn't hear, "She's not here about a shelf, man." And I told him he was wrong, and he was not wrong, because the shelf, when I finally built it 2 weeks later, was noticeably smaller and less complicated than the amount of time she'd spent supposedly discussing it would have suggested. We fell into a rhythm that felt less like performance and more like a life quietly assembling itself around us without either of us announcing it. She started leaving a spare key under my mat for emergencies, though the only emergency that ever occurred was her locking herself out twice in 1 month. I started keeping her favorite tea in my cabinet, not because the rules required it, but because I liked the way her face changed when she found it there, like a small proof that I'd been paying attention. We developed a signal, a specific number of knocks, that meant "come find me." Something happened, and used it more often than either of us would have predicted for 2 people who supposedly weren't really together. "You're doing the thing," my coworker Marcus told me one afternoon in the shop, watching me sand the same cabinet edge for the 3rd time while my mind was clearly somewhere else, specifically 2 floors up and 1 door down. What thing? The thing where a man convinces himself a fake relationship is purely professional right up until it isn't. It's not a profession. Nobody's getting paid. That's worse, Dawson. That means you're doing it for free. I ignored him, mostly because he was right, and being right about things you don't want to hear is its own kind of insult. The turning point, if I had to name one, happened on a Tuesday in early November, 3.5 weeks into the arrangement, when Sadie showed up at my door at 11 at night in an old college t-shirt and told me her physical therapy clinic had lost a huge contract that afternoon, and she didn't want to be alone, and could she just sit on my couch for a while. "You don't need an excuse to sit on my couch," I said, stepping back to let her in. "We're basically dating, remember? I have to console you. It's in the rules." She managed a small laugh, but it didn't have its usual crack in it, and she curled up on the far end of my couch with her knees pulled to her chest in a way that made her look smaller than she was. And I did the only thing that made sense, which was to sit close enough that our shoulders touched and let her talk it out. "I keep thinking about what Bram said," she admitted eventually, staring at the muted television. At the party. That I look happy. You do look happy. I know. That's the confusing part. I thought I'd feel something different, seeing him. Angry, or sad, or something dramatic. Instead, I mostly just felt like I was looking at a stranger who used to know my coffee order. That's not confusing. That's called moving on. Is it though? Or is it just that I found a really convincing distraction who's very good at pretending to hold my hand? I looked at her, and she looked back, and the space between us on that couch felt suddenly much smaller than it had a minute earlier. Sadie, I said, carefully, because Rule 3 was sitting right there in the room with us, unspoken but enormous. I haven't been pretending to hold your hand. Not for a while now. Her breath caught, audibly, and for one long moment neither of us said anything. The muted television flickering blue light across her face, and I really thought, that something was about to happen. That 6 weeks of careful, deliberate not quite touching was finally going to collapse into something real. Then her phone buzzed on the coffee table, and she flinched and glanced at it out of pure reflex, and I watched her whole expression change. What? I asked. It's my mom, she said. She wants to know if Bram's coming to the wedding as Priya's +1's replacement, because apparently his new girlfriend broke up with him last week and Priya still likes him, and she stopped, shook her head. It doesn't matter. It clearly matters. You went pale. I'm processing. She set the phone face down, harder than necessary. Can we not talk about Bram right now? We weren't talking about Bram. We were talking about. I gestured vaguely between us, suddenly unsure how to finish the sentence. I know what we were talking about, she said quietly, and for a second I thought she was going to finish it herself. Instead, she pulled her knees tighter to her chest and said, I should go back to my place. Early shift tomorrow. She left 10 minutes later, and I stood in my doorway watching her walk the 15 feet to 2B, and I understood, with the particular clarity that comes at 11:40 at night, that whatever this arrangement had started as, it wasn't that anymore, at least not for me, and possibly not for her either, and neither of us had any idea what to do about it. Bram Whitaker showed up at Priya's wedding exactly the way Sadie had feared, except worse, because he didn't come as a stray guest her family half remembered. He came as Priya's fiancé's college roommate, seated at our table, 3 chairs down from Sadie, wearing a navy suit that fit him like it had been sewn onto his shoulders that morning. This is fine, Sadie muttered to me as we found our seats, her hand already finding mine under the table like it had become instinct rather than performance. This is completely fine. I just need to get through cocktail hour, the ceremony, dinner, the toasts, the first dance, and approximately 4 hours of my grandmother asking why we haven't set a date yet. A date for what? I may have implied to Opal that things were serious. She kept asking, Dawson. She has a look. You haven't experienced the look. I feel like I'm walking into a trap I didn't sign up for. You signed the rules. Rule 5, unofficial. Sometimes we improvise for Opal. The ceremony was lovely. In the way these things generally are when you're distracted by the fact that your fake girlfriend's ex-fiancé keeps glancing over 3 chairs to your left with an expression you can't quite name. Priya cried. Her fiancé, a soft-spoken architect named Theo, cried harder. Sadie squeezed my hand at the vows, and I squeezed back, and for a few minutes I let myself believe none of it was complicated, that we were just 2 people at a wedding, holding hands because we wanted to. Then cocktail hour started, and Bram made his move. Sadie, he said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne, offering her one like it was the most natural gesture in the world. You look incredible tonight. Bram. She accepted the glass, mostly, I suspected, to have something to do with her hands. Enjoying the wedding? It's good to be back around everyone. I missed this. The family stuff. He glanced at me, then back at her. Mind if I steal her for a second, Dawson? Old friends catching up. Every instinct I had said no. Every rule Sadie had written in that notebook said this was exactly the kind of moment we hadn't planned for. But Sadie gave me a small nod, the kind that said it's fine, I've got this, and I let her go, watching her walk toward the garden with Bram Whitaker's hand hovering near the small of her back, without quite touching it. And I spent the next 12 minutes pretending to listen to Aunt Carla's husband explain actuarial tables, while every part of my attention stayed fixed on the garden doors. When Sadie came back, her face had that too composed look I'd learned to recognize, the one she wore when she was holding something together with visible effort. What did he want? I asked, low just for her. To apologize. For Denver. For the way he ended things. She sat down heavily beside me, reaching for her wine glass. He said he made a mistake. Something cold settled in my stomach. What kind of mistake? The kind where you leave someone 2 weeks before your wedding and then, 16 months later, decide you regret it. She laughed, but there was no warmth in it. He asked if there was any chance. For us. If Dawson and I were really, she stopped herself. Were really what? Serious, she said quietly. He asked if we were really serious, or if I was just trying to make him jealous. The music shifted behind us, the DJ calling everyone toward the dance floor for the first dance, and I sat there with my chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with my suit jacket, and I asked the question I probably shouldn't have asked at a wedding, 3 glasses of champagne into a night that had already asked too much of both of us. What did you tell him? Sadie looked at me, and for a long moment she didn't answer. And in that silence, I felt something that scared me more than any actual rejection could have. The possibility that she didn't know herself. I told him it wasn't his business, she said finally. Because it isn't. Whatever this is, it's ours. Not something for him to evaluate and decide he wants back. That's not really an answer, Sadie. I know, she said. And there was something raw in her voice now. Something that had cracked open the careful composure she'd been wearing all night. I don't have a clean answer right now, Dawson. I have an ex-fiancé who broke my heart and showed up tonight acting like he still has a claim on it. And I have you, who has spent 6 weeks being so unbelievably good to me that I don't know how to separate what's real anymore from what we agreed to perform. Can we get through tonight and figure the rest out tomorrow? It wasn't the answer I wanted. But it was an honest one, and honesty, even the incomplete kind, was still more than I'd expected in that moment. So I nodded, and I took her hand again, and we went through the motions of the rest of the reception like 2 people holding a truce they hadn't fully agreed to. We didn't figure it out tomorrow. We didn't figure it out for the rest of that week, either, both of us circling the conversation and neither of us willing to be the one to start it, which is its own kind of answer, if you think about it long enough. The days after the wedding turned strange in a way I hadn't anticipated. Sadie and I still saw each other, because we were neighbors, because the mill building had exactly 1 working laundry room, and our schedules kept colliding in it, because 6 weeks of habit doesn't dissolve just because 2 people are avoiding the one conversation that matters. But something had shifted, gone careful and quiet between us. The easy banter replaced with a politeness that felt worse than any argument could have. You've been weird, Marcus told me at the shop, watching me measure the same board 4 times. I haven't been weird. You alphabetized the stain samples. Nobody alphabetizes the stain samples. Maybe I like order. You like Sadie Vaughn, and you're panicking because her ex-fiancé showed up wanting a second chance, and now you don't know if you're a real boyfriend or a placeholder. And instead of talking to her about it, you're taking it out on the stain samples. I set down the board. When did you become a therapist? I've been married for 9 years, Dawson. I've learned things through repeated exposure. He leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. Look, man, you either tell her how you feel, or you spend the rest of this fake relationship watching her decide whether the ex deserves another shot. And either way, you're going to feel terrible. So you might as well pick the version where you at least said something. He wasn't wrong, which was, as usual, the most annoying part. I found my opening 4 days later, on a Thursday evening, when I ran into Sadie in the laundry room. Both of us pretending to fold clothes that had clearly finished drying 20 minutes earlier, because neither of us wanted to be the first to leave. So, I said, into the hum of the dryers. Bram called you again. Sadie's hands went still over a stack of towels. How did you know that? You have a specific face you make when your phone rings, and it's him. It's the same face you made at the wedding. She sighed, sitting down on the folding table, which the building superintendent had explicitly told us both, on separate occasions, not to do. He wants to meet, actually talk, not at a family event, not with an audience. He says he's been thinking about it for months, since before his engagement party, and seeing me there with you just made it feel urgent. And what do you want? I don't know, Dawson. That's the honest answer. 6 months ago, I would have said absolutely not. I never want to see that man again outside of mandatory family functions. And now he's saying all the things I used to imagine him saying, back when I was still angry enough to write him letters I never sent. And part of me feels like I owe it to 18-year-old me, or 24-year-old me, or whichever version of me spent a year wondering what she did wrong, to at least hear him out. That's fair, I said, even though it cost me something to say it. That's a completely fair thing to want. But I need you to know something first, before you go meet him and figure out what you want. I set down the shirt I'd been folding for the 3rd time. This stopped being fake for me a while ago, Sadie. I don't know exactly when. Maybe the farmer's market. Maybe the couch, the night your clinic lost the contract. Maybe it was never fake for me at all, and I just needed the excuse of the arrangement to let myself be around you as much as I wanted to be. But I'm not going to stand here and pretend I'm neutral about whether you meet up with your ex to talk about giving things another try. I'm not neutral. I care what you decide. I care a lot. Sadie stared at me, the dryers still humming behind her, and for a long moment, she didn't say anything at all, and I thought, with a sinking feeling, that I'd said too much, too soon. In the worst possible location, surrounded by the smell of dryer sheets, and somebody's forgotten fabric softener. Dawson, she said finally, quietly. I need to think. Not because I don't feel it too, because I do. I think I have for weeks. But because I spent a long time convincing myself that what happened with Bram was entirely his failure. And if there's any chance that's not the whole story, I owe it to myself to actually look at it clearly before I let myself fall into something else. I don't want to jump from one thing into another because it's easier than sitting with the hard part. That's a good reason, I said, even though every part of me wanted to argue with it. I don't like it, but it's a good reason. Can you give me some time? Not to decide about you and me specifically. Just time to talk to him and figure out what I actually feel, separate from what's convenient or safe or already living next door. I nodded, even though something in my chest felt like it was folding in on itself the same way the towel in my hands kept refusing to fold neatly. Take your time, I said. I'm not going anywhere. I live 15 feet away. It's not like I can avoid you even if I wanted to, which I don't. She almost smiled at that, a small, tired thing, and gathered her laundry, and left me standing in that room with an armful of shirts I no longer had any interest in folding. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling fan, replaying every version of the conversation I could have handled better, wondering if I'd pushed too hard, too fast, in the worst possible setting, surrounded by lint traps and someone else's forgotten dryer sheets. Around 1 a.m, I gave up on sleep entirely and went to sit on the fire escape with the terrible coffee mug Sadie had claimed as hers, turning it over in my hands like it might tell me something useful. Marcus called me the next morning before I'd even made it to the shop, which was unusual enough that I answered on the first ring. You told her, he said. Not a question. How do you already know that? Because you sound like a man who told a woman he loved her and then spent the entire night reorganizing his emotional furniture instead of sleeping. I've been there. Not with Sadie. With my wife. Different laundry room. Same panic. She needs time to figure out the Bram thing. To be sure. That's fair, Marcus said, and I could hear him nodding through the phone, the way he did when he was about to say something I didn't want to hear but needed to. But let me tell you something, since apparently I'm your unlicensed relationship consultant now. Being scared of losing her to him is not the same thing as actually losing her to him. You told her the truth. That's the only part that was ever yours to control. What she does with it belongs to her. Go to work. Sand something. Let the woman think. I went to work. I sanded several things that did not require sanding. And when Sadie knocked on my door 2 days later, I answered it faster than I probably should have admitted to, my whole body tuned to the sound of her specific knock like it was the only sound in the building worth hearing. What I didn't know, until Sadie told me much later, was that she'd spent that Friday night on the phone with her best friend from physical therapy school, a woman named Priyanka. Not to be confused with cousin Priya, a coincidence that had caused no end of confusion at family gatherings. Pacing the length of her apartment with the phone wedged against her shoulder while she reorganized a spice rack that did not need reorganizing. Say it slower, Priyanka told her, according to Sadie's later, slightly embarrassed retelling. You're telling me the fake boyfriend told you he's not faking, and instead of being thrilled, you're spiraling about a coffee date with the man who left you at the altar. Not the altar. 2 weeks before the wedding. There's a difference. There is not a meaningful difference, Sadie. I'm not spiraling. I'm being thorough. You alphabetized your spice rack 40 minutes ago. You're spiraling. Sadie admitted, eventually, that she'd sat down on her kitchen floor at that point, back against the cabinets, and said the things she hadn't let herself say out loud yet. I think I'm scared that if I let myself want Dawson, and it works, then I have to admit that everything that happened with Bram wasn't actually about me being unlovable. It was just him being a coward. And somehow that's harder to accept than just believing I did something wrong. That, Priyanka said, is the most therapist thing a physical therapist has ever said to me. And also, respectfully, it's completely ridiculous. You don't get bonus points for staying sad longer. Go see Bram if you need closure. Ask your real questions. But don't you dare let some leftover fear about being unlovable talk you out of a man who told you the truth in a laundry room because he couldn't stand to wait for a more convenient moment. When did you get so wise? I've been listening to you talk about Dawson for 6 weeks straight, describing, and I quote, the specific way he sands wood when he's thinking, like it's a personality trait worth analyzing. I've had time to form opinions. Sadie laughed at that, apparently, for the first time all evening, and it was that conversation, she told me, more than anything Bram eventually said over coffee, that gave her the clarity to walk into that meeting without the old fears steering the conversation. She went in already knowing, somewhere underneath the nerves, what she wanted the answer to be. She just needed to hear Bram's apology to be sure the door was actually closed, rather than just quietly ajar the way it had been for 16 months. Sadie met Bram for coffee that Saturday. I know because she texted me beforehand. One line. Going now. We'll tell you how it goes if you want to know. And I spent the 90 minutes she was gone reorganizing my entire tool bench, which Marcus would have had opinions about if he'd been there to see it. She knocked on my door around noon, still in the sweater she'd left in, her expression unreadable in a way that made my stomach drop before she'd said a single word. Can I come in? Of course. I stepped back, and she walked past me into the apartment, sitting on the same couch where I'd told her the truth 4 days earlier, and I braced myself for whatever she'd come to tell me. He apologized, she said, staring at her hands. Really apologized. Said Denver was about cold feet, not about me, that he panicked and did the cowardly thing instead of the honest thing, and that he spent 16 months regretting it. He asked if there was any chance I'd consider trying again. Slowly. No pressure. And what did you say? I said no. She looked up at me then, and something in her face had settled, gone clear in a way it hadn't been since the wedding. Dawson, I sat across from him, the man I used to think I'd spend my whole life with, and I listened to him apologize for something I'd spent a year being angry about, and I felt relief, mostly. Relief that he finally said the things I needed to hear so I could stop wondering. But I didn't feel the pull I expected to feel. I didn't feel any pull at all. Because the whole time he was talking, I kept thinking about you. About how you've spent 6 weeks being patient and steady and honest in a way he never was, even before Denver, even at his best. I kept thinking about the couch and the farmer's market and the way you handled Aunt Carla's husband without a single complaint, and the fact that you told me the truth in a laundry room instead of waiting for a convenient moment, because you'd rather be honest and uncomfortable than easy and dishonest. Sadie, I'm not done, she said, and there was a small, unsteady laugh in her voice now, the good kind. I told him no because there's nothing left there to go back to. Whatever we had, it belongs to a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. But there's something here, with you, that isn't left over from anything. It's new. It's entirely its own thing, and I've been so scared to admit that, because I didn't want to mix up gratitude for kindness with actual love, and I needed to be sure before I said anything. Because you deserve someone who's sure. And are you? I asked, my voice not entirely steady either. Sure? Sadie stood up, crossed the small distance between us, and took my hand, the same way she had at the engagement party, except there was no audience now, no mother to convince, no fiction to maintain. I've never been more sure of anything, she said. I love you, Dawson Riley. Not fake. Not for an audience. Just you actually, entirely on purpose. I don't remember deciding to kiss her. I just remember that 1 second we were standing in my living room with 6 weeks of careful distance finally collapsing between us, and the next second there wasn't any distance left at all. And when we finally broke apart, both of us laughing for no reason either of us could have explained, she pressed her forehead against mine and said, for the record, this was never in the rules. I think we can amend the rules, I said. Rule 6. No more pretending. Rule 7. This part's real, and it stays real. I can live with those rules, she said, and kissed me again. And I thought, standing there in the middle of my very ordinary living room, that I had never in my life felt luckier to have said yes to something as ridiculous as being somebody's fake boyfriend. 8 months later, I proposed to Sadie Vaughn on the same lakeside porch where I'd first shaken Bram Whitaker's hand and felt something protective ignite in my chest for the first time. Priya and Theo had invited us back for their 1-year anniversary party. The same string lights looped along the same porch beams, the same caterer circulating with trays of things wrapped in prosciutto. And I had spent 3 weeks planning exactly how I wanted to do this. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from 6 weeks of pretending, it was that the setting mattered, that the story mattered, that some moments deserved to echo the ones that made them possible. This feels familiar, Sadie said, glancing around the porch with a small smile as we arrived, her hand already finding mine. No performance required anymore, just habit built on a year of meaning it. Please tell me my mother isn't going to corner you about wedding dates again. Actually, I said, my heart doing something complicated in my chest. I was hoping we could talk about that. She turned to look at me, confused for exactly as long as it took me to get down on one knee, right there on the same porch, string lights glowing overhead, and pull the ring box out of my jacket pocket. Dawson. Her hand flew to her mouth. A year ago, you stood right about there, I said, nodding toward the spot by the porch door, and grabbed my hand because your ex-fiancé walked in and you needed someone to pretend to love you for 3 hours. And I want you to know that I said yes to that ridiculous plan because I liked you. Even then, even before I understood how much. And somewhere between the fake dinners and the real conversations and the laundry room and the wedding where I got jealous of a man in an expensive suit, I stopped pretending, and I've never stopped being sure since. I don't want to be your fake anything anymore, Sadie. I want to be your husband. Real, on purpose, for the rest of our lives. She was crying before I finished, the good kind, the kind that comes with a laugh tangled up in it. And when I finally asked the question, she said yes so fast I almost missed the actual word underneath the sound of her saying it twice. The whole porch erupted, Aunt Carla clapping so hard she nearly dropped her champagne, Opal nodding like she'd known all along, which, knowing Opal, she probably had. Priya hugged us both so tightly I nearly dropped the ring box a second time. I glanced across the crowd once, half expecting to feel some echo of that old tension, and caught Bram Whitaker near the bar, watching with an expression that had settled somewhere between resigned and genuinely happy for us. He raised his glass slightly when our eyes met, and I nodded back, because whatever complicated feelings the two of us had once carried into that porch had long since burned off into something simpler. Two men who both, eventually, wanted the same thing for Sadie, which was for her to be happy, and only one of us had gotten to be the reason. We got married the following spring, in the backyard of the house we'd bought together 6 months after the engagement. A narrow two-story with a kitchen island I built with my own hands and a laundry room Sadie insisted we never take for granted, given its historic significance to our relationship. These days, our mornings look like this. Sadie leaving for the clinic before I'm fully awake, kissing me on her way out with a coffee already in hand. Me heading to the shop a little later, stopping to feed the ridiculous orange cat we adopted the year we got married, who Sadie named Cabinet, because apparently that joke never gets old to her. Both of us reconvening most evenings at that kitchen island, trading stories about our days over whatever she's decided to cook, usually involving too much garlic, always without cilantro. Aunt Carla's insurance husband still asks me, every holiday, whether cabinetry is a stable industry. Opal still looks at me like she's pricing me for parts, though I've come to understand that's just her version of affection. And every October, on the anniversary of that first ridiculous request in my doorway, Sadie and I go back to that same lakeside venue. If Priya and Theo will have us, and stand on that porch for a minute, just the two of us, remembering the night a fake relationship turned into the realest thing either of us had ever built. Best decision I ever made, Sadie told me last year, standing in that exact spot, was asking my weird cabinet-building neighbor to pretend to love me for 3 hours. Best decision I ever made, I told her, was saying yes. She laughed, that same laugh that cracked open in my doorway a lifetime ago, and I kissed her, right there under the string lights, no audience required, no pretending left to do. What would you have done if your neighbor showed up at your door and asked you to be her fake boyfriend for one night, only for it to turn into 6 weeks? And her ex-fiancé came back wanting a second chance right as you realized you'd fallen for her for real? Have you ever had a fake relationship, or even a small white lie, turn into something that changed your whole life? Tell your story in the comments below. And if you want to be a little closer to us, we've opened up memberships where you'll get shorter, exclusive stories every single week with no ads. If this one got you, drop a like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.